Welcome back to the Dark Reading News Desk here at RSA 2025. Joining me now is John Bennett, CEO of Dashlane. John, thank you for joining us on the Dark Reading News Desk.
Terry, delighted to be here. It's a great week at RSA, and looking forward to the conversation.
All right. Well, our topic is identity and credential management. It's super potent, super relevant for the times we're in. Identity and credential management obviously figure highly both in like the risk profiles, but also the threat vectors that organizations are trying to defend against. Kick us off, if you would, just with maybe a snapshot of the current threat landscape where identity and personal credentials are concerned. Super curious about what you're seeing out there.
Great, and maybe just for a little bit of context background, for your viewers is I came to Dashlane 2 years ago. It's a 15-year-old company. We started out, which is focus on how do we protect consumers, how do we make their digital lives safer and easier to navigate. But over the past half decade, we've really focused on this question around the B2B problem, and that's, I think, very relevant to the topic. So today we secure 25,000 businesses around credential security, and I think this topic around sort of the emerging risk around credentials, this blending between employees bringing in both personal and business, and this crossover. I think there's a couple things that we're sort of observing, which is one, with the emergence of AI, it's both been sort of interesting for what we're doing, from cybersecurity perspective and how that's helping us. But I think the first point that we're observing is it is accelerating sort of the sophistication of these credential attacks, anti-phishing, these phishing attacks. They're more efficient. They don't ever sleep.
Right.
And so the volume and the sophistication is accelerating. And then at the same time, we still see that, the number one sort of, threat vector, for companies for breaches is through this like human element, right? So they're getting access to credentials that have been leaked on the dark web, or they're, getting them through a successful phishing attack. And so, for me, it's there's a proliferation and acceleration of this threat vector.
Well, I think you're also giving voice to the non-human identities that are also starting to proliferate as a result of AI implementations.
Yeah. I think when I think about so the one aspect, like what's happening sort of at the human risk level in the companies, and we just launched a platform the week before this show called Dashlane Omnix, and we're beginning to see, before I talk about so the machine element, is what we're seeing is we have to sort of, like, as an industry within password management, we have to think more holistically about the problem, and one aspect of that is that password management, as we've known it traditionally, it's dealing with secrets, it's dealing with credentials, it's dealing with passkeys. But there's a large portion of the employee base that they're not using that technology, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not creating a problem. But what we're seeing now is on sort of like, again, these AI-driven, machine-driven, attack vectors, is this sort of like broad portion of the employee base is very suspect to these type of attacks. I think, again, to your question in terms of these, machine identities, what we're beginning to see now is every company is, in every department is saying, what does AI mean for me? What does it mean for my function? How does it, accelerate, sort of business outcomes? What does it mean for my job 3 to 5 years from now? And that's driving what we'd say is like shadow IT 2.0. And what we mean by that is, employees and departments are bringing these agents and AI models into the company, and they're not always supervised or managed, by the IT department, and that's creating another enormous risk for the company.
In that vein, use of generative AI is up across the board in enterprises, and one of the weird sort of dynamics that's sprung out of that is the rise of these shadow IT uses of AI in corporate environments. Break it down for us as to why this is happening. Is it because the corporate machines are more powerful, so users want to use it at work as opposed to doing it at home? And how are enterprises responding to the issue?
I think this again is like the thread of shadow IT. So we know, we had a cybersecurity report that we look at anonymously at sort of the data that's stored within our vault, and we know that about 40%, about 40% of the applications that employees are accessing, in many cases, they're not protected by MFA, they're not behind SSO. And now what you're seeing is, again, these employees are not just bringing in applications, but they're bringing in generative AI. And the increased sort of threat landscape for the organization is, I think one is you think about the type of data that those models can ingest, right? So that there's example, of the employee at Disney that, downloading
Right.
a large language model and what happened in that environment, right? And so I think this is a concern for CISOs and the IT organizations, which is how do we strike the right balance? So one is employees at the end of the day, again, this human element, they just want to get to the application they think they need to use to get their job done to drive business outcomes. And so it's not that their intent is malicious, in 99% of the cases. But what this is creating now is, if you just look at the velocity of these applications. So it kind of goes back, if you think back 15 years with the emergence of cloud computing, moving things to the cloud, this is even moving at a steeper adoption curve than that, right? So it's just the scale that it's going and showing up in organizations. And I think what companies are beginning to think about is how do I strike the right balance? How do I secure the organization, without locking down innovation? And I think from a Dashlane perspective, how we're thinking about that problem is give visibility to the credentials that are being used in the organizations that are outside the ones you know of. Give them visibility into the applications that are in use in the organization. And if someone's, either using a compromised, application that's out on the dark web, provide a response, try to stop that. And I think the other piece is also on the, if they're going to put, valid credentials into, a malicious site, how can you sort of prevent that? I think that's how I think the organization began to think is this intersection between sort of the human element, this desire to adopt this technology, learn about it, and apply it to the business, with the security teams need to strike the right balance. And
Sure.
I don't think we've completely figured it out yet, but it's becoming I think a real focus area.
Well, there's another area that's proving tough to figure out, and this is the role of weak and compromised credentials in so many attacks and breaches. Why can't businesses solve this problem? Is it fair to blame them? Is it faulty training? Is it just vendors can't create better users?
Right.
Break that down for us.
Ted, it's a great question. This is sort of the way I think about it. One is when we talk to the CISOs and the IT administrators that live in our products and are dealing with this problem, the one thing that's common is they're making a significant investment in their security stack, their security posture. Sort of the back of the envelope is, if you take sort of a mid-sized business to a large enterprise, they're spending $3,000 or $4,000 probably annually per employee.
Sure.
Right, on the security stack. What we're seeing now, though, is a greater recognition with bring your own device, hybrid work environment, this proliferation of sort of the shadow IT, both generative AI and other applications. I think so that's one aspect, right, is that there's just so much changing sort of dynamics from this world where things were behind a firewall. Everyone knows that dynamics change. On the other side, what you're seeing is like the nation state sponsored, bad actors. They're highly funded, they're collaborative, they're willing to work, with non-state actors, and with AI, the unit economics, right? Their efficiency, what they're going to look at is like, what are the most successful attack vectors? And Verizon's data breach report they just released, like, number 1 and number 3 respectively is them getting access to these compromised credentials, or through like successful phishing attacks. And so I think what the challenge for the organizations here is, again, which is beginning to realize I've got to start thinking about this human element. It's not like through malicious intent, but I've got to start looking at this element through what am I doing around security awareness and training? What am I doing around other tools that I can put in place? And I think this is an area that we've really focused on, which is you got to give them visibility in terms of how big and how pervasive is the threat. Then how can you respond to, at least to like nudge or push the employee in that moment with context, like
Sure.
this is this, and then longer term you can remediate like through a password vault or some other mechanism. But it is it's accelerating.
Sure.
It's successful. It's a successful attack vector, and I do believe that we're now beginning to see where companies are saying, I got to think about every employee, not just a department.
Right. John, the advent of passwordless is out there. We're on the horizon. Wrap us up with some brief thoughts around what you recommend for companies who are starting to shift toward a passwordless approach.
Yeah, it's great. I think it's a great way to end. There's emerging technologies around passwordless, whether that's passkeys or other technologies that have the potential. I mean, it's one of the, I think, greatest sort of cybersecurity enhancements where we now feel that there's a path for us to eliminate passwords, and we all know why those are imperfect and not great. I think if I answer this in terms of just what the business environment is where we are in that journey and what that looks like. If I look at it through the lens of passkeys, enormous sort of innovation there. They're highly anti-phishing resistant. It is machine generated. Some of the things that we're working on and companies are working through is the use case within a company is different than within a consumer. And what we see that still needs to be solved, which is these use cases around sharing across the organization, and how do you sort of manage that? In like the case of passkeys, like how do you sort of manage those workflows? I think that's one area that we're still working through in terms of understanding how we meet the needs of that. I think the second big piece around passwordless is also in terms of where do these need to be stored. In our particular case, we leverage technology, confidential computing. It's highly secure. It's in the cloud. When you're doing encryption and de-encryption and managing stuff at the device level, that's very manageable. But when you want to start, solving some of these enterprise workflows, you have to think about like how do you extend sort of that zero knowledge capability to the cloud, and that's one aspect I think that's going to emerge is how do we take some of this technology that sort of existed at the device level where zero knowledge, is very manageable and controlled, and now sort of again bring that to the cloud. So I think it's years, not months, for
good to know
to get there.
All right. Well, that's some great insights into the future of identity. John, we so appreciate you doing this segment on Dark Reading News Desk. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ed. Great being here.
We've been talking with John Bennett of Dashlane. This has been Terry Sweeney for the Dark Reading News Desk. Thanks for joining us for this segment. We'll see you next time.